you've written to the Justice Secretary. If this was your A-level results, you wouldn't be getting into any university anytime soon.
No, extremely concerning letter that we've written. We are very worried about what we found at HMP Wood Hill, a prison that holds some long-term and very high-risk prisoners, yep. And an enormous amount that needs to be done.
What's interesting is that, in addition to the specifics, is the lack of improvement over the years, which, of course, wasn't lost on you, Charlie, when you did this report.
No, that's absolutely right. We've been concerned about Wood Hill for some time. This is a prison that holds some of the most risky prisoners in the country. It's got prisoners who've been in often for a long time, who are doing long stretches, and they're experienced prisoners, often in the case of Wood Hill being looked after and supervised by extremely inexperienced staff. And what we found, and this has been an ongoing theme at Wood Hill, is there simply aren't enough staff to be able to run a good, safe jail.
And looking at this and reading what you have written and the report that you compiled, it seems fundamentally that this really does come down to staff. First and foremost, there are other issues there, of course, but fundamentally it's a staffing problem.
Yes, it is. And of course, what's happened at Wood Hill is they've got into a vicious cycle, because Wood Hill has the highest number of serious staff assaults of any jail in the country. And of course, that for many staff members means they don't want to work there. They don't want to work in an environment where they're going in and they're feeling unsafe. And that leads to higher levels of staff sickness, higher levels of staff attrition. And that simply feeds into the problem that we saw in the jail, with prisoners not being unlocked, prisoners not feeling supervised. And what's interesting about this jail is that 70% of prisoners told us that they themselves have been frightened in their time at Wood Hill. And these are long-serving, experienced prisoners. Yeah. And yet they were nervous. There were 26 who were too frightened to even come out of their cells.
Wow. And that isn't really how prison should be functioning. I know there's always a hang 'em and flog 'em fraternity out there, Charlie, but even putting that aside, that's not how prisons work effectively, and that's not how our prisons are meant to work at all.
Well, absolutely right. I mean, these guys have committed serious offences and they are in prison for a reason. But nevertheless, the vast majority of the men at Wood Hill will be coming out sometime. Yeah. And the question we have to ask is their experience of being in Wood Hill, is that making them more or less likely to reoffend when they come out? And our enormous concern is it's making them more likely to reoffend. Levels of drugs inside the prison are incredibly high. And things like education, opportunities to get to work, the sorts of habits and the sorts of skills that prisoners need if they're going to succeed when they come out, those things are being routinely cancelled. Why again? Because there aren't enough staff.
Yeah. What sort of teeth does your department have in this? You can inspect prisons, you can compile your recommendations, you can write very reasonable letters such as this, very important letters such as this to in this case, the Secretary of State for Justice. What then happens? Have you heard from Mr. Chalk in response to this yet?
Well, the Secretary of State has 28 days in which to respond to this letter, and with an action plan explaining what the prison service is going to do. But of course, the prison service, to some extent, is hamstrung by the population crisis that it has at the moment. The number of prisoners coming into jail simply isn't keeping pace with the number of places that are available. Yeah. And what you would have done in the past with a jail like Wood Hill that had got into such serious difficulties is you would have closed down 2 or 3 rings, half the amount of prisoners in the jail, and then gradually built it up. Of course, at the moment, that simply isn't an option because of pressures on population. So this is a real challenge that we're laying down to the prison service and to ministers to fix what is an intractable and long-term problem at a complex jail.
And I would imagine that even if Mr. Chalk or others respond recognising everything and acknowledging that all of these points are reasonable and need addressing with the best will in the world, that can't happen overnight.
It won't happen overnight, but what we want to see is clear action that shows us that progress is happening. We'll be back at Wood Hill within the next year, and we'll want to see a considerable improvement on what we found this time round. If not, we would be enormously concerned. This is a critically important jail in Britain. It's part of the long-term high security estate, and it must be functioning better. We must be doing a better job with these long-term and often high-risk prisoners. because if we don't, when they come out, they're going to pose a risk to the public, and that's not good enough.
Mayor Adams says he wants the city council to rethink his predecessor's plan to close Rikers Island in 4 years.
But the council speaker says no way. CBS 2 political reporter Marcia Kramer is here in studio now with more on this. Marcia?
Well, Christine and Maurice, Mayor Adams says it's a simple equation. 6,200 inmates at Rikers minus 4,000 or so who can fit into the new community jails equals thousands of criminals put back on the street. But council leaders and advocates who staged an emotional rally say it's fuzzy math. They insist on saying ta-ta to the troubled lockup.
Ho, ho, hey, hey, the countdown begins today.
Passions ran high at a rally in City Hall Park to insist that Mayor Adams stick to the timetable for closing Rikers, August 2027, or as the countdown clock says, in 1,460 days. In recent days, Mayor Adams has raised questions about whether closing Rikers is the right public safety move, but advocates and elected officials are having none of that. Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso compared the Law and Order Adams to former Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
What he is doing is, one, increasing the population of Rikers Island the way Giuliani did, increasing stop and frisk the way Giuliani did, increasing the budget of the police department the way Giuliani did.
Council Speaker Adrian Adams, whose body would have to approve any changes to the closed Rikers law, issued a statement insisting the deadline is the deadline. The mayor needs to take steps to reduce the jail population, she said. The city must make consistent investments in pretrial services, alternatives to incarceration and reentry services, while addressing unacceptable lengths of stay with the courts, district attorneys, and public defenders, the speaker said.
We stand here today 4 years from the deadline for closing Rikers, and we have to be honest, we are not on the path that was set out for closing Rikers Island, and we're here to organize and demand that we get back on that path.
A spokesman for the mayor insisted the administration is moving forward in building the 4 community jails that are to replace Rikers, even increasing the capacity of the planned Brooklyn lockup by more than 150 beds, given the realities of the city's jail system. But earlier this week, the mayor asked the city council to reconsider the plan.
Are we as a city willing to say that 2,000 extremely dangerous people, because we don't have enough space, we're going to turn them back onto the streets and back to the communities that they committed these crimes in the first place? I'm not ready to say that.
Well, all this comes as the city is locked in a battle to continue to run the Rikers complex, not for long or however long it stays open. Lawyers for the inmates and even the Manhattan U.S. attorney have asked the judge to appoint an outside receiver. They're due back in court in November. Christine, Maurice.
Okay, Marcia, thank you.
Thank you, Marcia.
And it was the time when they sat down to figure out, what can we do now? What's our next step?
The term comrade, to me, really kind of resonates, because it's not just, there's a brotherhood and sisterhood that was involved. They had magnificent personalities, like huge jokes and teasing. And so don't discount like the laughter and the joy that was also, you know, part of the struggle.
Yeah.
And you had to have a counterpoint to this, the heaviness of what they were going through. It was profound, the weight of what they were working through, the level of opposition, the physical threats to many of them, the danger, the physical danger.
We'll have more of my conversation with the Daughters of the Movement coming up.
He told me this story about being a young organizer in Long Island. A farmer had kidnapped him and tied him up.
Plus, a revealing look at this important Harlem landmark.
This unassuming building here has a very rich history.
A phenomenal amount of work occurred in this building.
And we'll be right back.
The countdown begins today. Ho, ho. Hey, hey. The countdown begins today. Ho, ho. We will close Rikers. All of us together will ensure that it closes, because it must close, and it will.
Prison reform advocates renewing their calls to close Rikers Island on the exact day the jail is set to close 4 years from now in 2027.
Hey, hey, ho, ho! Rikers Island got to
a week after the 8th inmate died at the notorious prison. This event marked the launch of a formal countdown clock, reminding the mayor and city council that time is ticking.
Let the mayor know that he has an obligation to close this place down. This is law. It was a plan that was well thought out and curated by years and years of organizing by directly impacted people.
The legal mandate to close the troubled jail was issued back in 2019 under the de Blasio administration, with 4 borough-based jails set to replace it. But now Mayor Adams is saying the city council should rethink that plan, citing concerns that the smaller jails can't hold the entire population of 6,000 inmates.
Are we as a city willing to say that 2,000 extremely dangerous people, because we don't have enough space, we're going to turn them back onto the streets and back to the communities that they committed these crimes in the first place? I'm not ready to say that.
Advocates striking back Thursday, saying many of the inmates are awaiting trial for nonviolent crimes and that the city should invest more resources into low-income communities.
The root of crime is often poverty, and if we can eradicate poverty and get people stabilized in the way that we can, the way that rich communities are, the way rich communities, you don't see police officers around every corner. They have resources, and that's what needs to happen in our city.
In a statement, City Council Speaker Adrian Adams and Councilmember Carlina Rivera say it is imperative that the mayor remains on track to closing Rikers and takes responsibility for implementing that law that requires the prison to close in 4 years. In Lower Manhattan, Janae Caldwell, Pix 11 News.
Like supposed to be closed down for good. A legal mandate calls for the facility to close by August 31st of 2027. But Mayor Eric Adams is saying that city leaders need to rethink that plan before creating a public safety issue. Listen.
Are we as a city willing to say that 2,000 extremely dangerous people, because we don't have enough space, we're going to turn them back onto the streets? So I think the city council must look at this plan, with 50% of the people there have mental health illness, and see how do we come up with a plan that gets the reform we're looking for and the safety that we're looking for.
So today, advocates will launch a countdown clock on the steps of City Hall, pressuring Mayor Adams to take action and move forward with the closure. New York City Councilwoman Jennifer Gutierrez sits on the Criminal Justice Committee, and she'll be at today's rally, and she's joining us this morning to discuss why it is so important for the city to meet this deadline. So good morning, Councilmember. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, so a lot of things at play, right? So the deadline has been pushed to 2027. But the mayor, he said, you know, these borough-based jails are over budget and way too small. So what is the backup plan if it doesn't get done in time? Where are these inmates going to be housed if these jails aren't completed?
Right. So the idea behind the whole borough-based jails legislation, as well as the renewable Rikers legislation that was passed a few years later, was the reality that our city needs to invest heavily in supportive services, like in that video you just rolled. The mayor mentioned the vast population of folks that are in need of mental health services. So the idea is that we're investing in all of those things that prevent folks, New Yorkers, predominantly Black and brown New Yorkers, from even being incarcerated to begin with. And we've only seen those numbers steadily climb since the beginning of his administration. So, you know, it seems, and it's very obvious that this administration is working against all of those benchmarks that advocates, previously incarcerated folks, clergy, and stakeholders put together to ensure that we had a much smaller population at Rikers. Prior to the pandemic, the numbers were reducing because we were able to invest in those programs. As many of you know, a lot of folks that are in Rikers are not even convicted of a felony. Oftentimes are just waiting for a trial. Okay. And that is the reality of a Rikers, of a jail. And so I don't know what this current city council can rethink, because the original legislation gave them at least a decade to work through all of those things, to be able to reduce the population and then build out these borough-based jails, smaller jails, so that we wouldn't be contributing to incarceration.
Okay, understood, right? And the mayor said that he will abide by this if the city council comes back and says, look, this is the plan, we're sticking with it. He said he'll stick with the law, right? And he will abide by that, and he's not going to get his way on everything. But when you look at the numbers, does he have a point And I hear what you're saying about reducing the jail population, but if the borough-based jails open in 2027 and they house 3,300, but the inmate population is 6,000, what happens to the remainder? Where do they go?
Well, the reason that the population currently is at 6,000 is because this administration has really moved forward with reliving through a lot of the stop and frisk policies. We're seeing a lot of people being jailed that are experiencing mental health episodes. We all heard the mayor earlier this year saying that, you know, essentially folks would be taken in even if they didn't consent to it. And that's really dangerous. And he even said it. We have this vast population of folks that are in need of mental health services. Are these people that need to sit in jail? Are these people that need to be incarcerated? I don't think so. These are people that need help. These are people that need services. And that's really what our city and our budget should be focusing on, is ensuring that those services are being covered, that we're making those.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm just, is there a contingency plan if that all goes to according to plan, right, and these folks get the mental health they so need? If the jail population did go above 3,300, where do they go?
I just don't believe that. I don't even believe that we can use that statistic right now, because I don't think we've ever seen an investment that we need. We have the 4 borough-based jails that have still not been constructed. We would love the mayor's support in expediting those permits so that they can be constructed, so that they can be finalized. But I don't even think that we can plan for that scenario because we haven't gotten there yet.
But is there a possibility that those borough-based jails aren't even going to get done, considering what we're going through with the migrant crisis? I mean, is that going to affect the budget in getting these jails built?
It's a concern. It's a real concern because as it's laid out in the law, the idea is that these jails would be built out and that Rikers would officially close. We'd be able to pass this property over to DCAS to live out, renewable Rikers. But it is a concern, and it's something that we have to continue to hold this administration accountable to. If there are other issues, then we can discuss it. But what we know about Rikers is that it must close. Yep. We have this conversation about an independent monitor because Rikers is a humanitarian crisis. It is exactly as harmful as you all think it is. Yep. We've lost close to 30 people in Rikers since the beginning of this administration last year, and that is dangerous.
Yes. All right. The mayor has kicked it back to the city council. You're having that rally. Keep us posted on how the communication and conversations continue, because we want to stay on top of the story. Councilman Gutierrez, appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much.